The Celestial Gateway station hummed with activity that evening, but Rachel Morgan barely noticed any more. After 2 years serving tables in the neutral zone's busiest restaurant, she'd learned to tune out the noise. Diplomats, traders, mercenaries, and tourists from 100 different worlds, they all wanted the same thing: food, drinks, and someone who wouldn't ask questions. Tonight was different though. Tonight, the Dragon Emperor himself was dining in the private section. Rachel had seen Emperor Kale-Thrus from a distance when he arrived. He was massive even by dragon standards. His scales shimmered like molten copper under the station lights, and his wings, folded tight against his back, could probably span the entire dining hall if he opened them. Dragons were all about flying. Their whole society revolved around it. The higher you could fly, the more respect you earned. She'd heard whispers from the other servers. The Emperor had come for treaty negotiations. Something about mining rights in the outer sectors. Big deal stuff that waitresses didn't need to worry about. Rachel was clearing plates from table 12 when she heard it. A horrible, wet choking sound coming from the service corridor behind the kitchen. She froze, listening. There it was again. Desperate. Panicked. She pushed through the door with her tray still balanced on one hip. The corridor was dim, lined with supply crates and cleaning equipment. And there, crumpled against the wall, was a small dragon. Not small like a dog. Small like a pony. Its scales were a pale, sickly gold, and its wings, Rachel's breath caught. The wings were wrong. Twisted. They dragged on the floor like broken umbrellas, useless and malformed. The creature was dying. Its eyes bulged, claws scraping at its own throat. Something was lodged in there, cutting off air. Rachel didn't think. She'd grown up in Colorado, oldest of 4 kids. Her little brother Tommy had asthma. She'd dealt with emergencies before. This was just another emergency, just another kid who needed help. She dropped the tray. Dishes crashed and shattered. She was already moving, hitting her knees beside the dragon child. It thrashed when she touched it, terrified, but Rachel wrapped her arms around its middle anyway. Easy, buddy. Easy. I got you. Her voice was steady even though her heart hammered. The creature was hot, scales like touching a car hood in summer. And heavy. Maybe 150 pounds of pure muscle and panic. She positioned her fist below its ribcage, at least where she thought a dragon's ribcage would be. Then she squeezed. Hard. Upward thrust, just like the posters in the break room showed. Nothing. The dragon made a sound like grinding metal. Its struggles were getting weaker. Rachel squeezed again. Harder. Come on, don't you dare. On the third compression, something flew out of the dragon's mouth. A piece of metal? No, something organic. Whatever it was, the dragon gasped and sucked in air with a horrible wheezing sound. There you go. That's it. Breathe. Rachel held the creature as it coughed and shuddered. Its golden eyes focused on her, wet with tears. Or whatever dragons cried. It made a sound, a broken, chirping whimper that reminded her of Tommy when he was little and scared. You're okay now. You're okay. Rachel stroked the scales along its neck, feeling the frantic heartbeat starting to slow. Where's your mom, huh? Where's your people? The dragon chirped again, sadder this time. It pressed its face against her chest like it was trying to hide. That's when Rachel realized something was very wrong here. This wasn't just a lost kid. The corridor door was propped open with a doorstop. Someone had left it here. Left this child alone in a back hallway where it could die and nobody would know until it was too late. Rage burned hot in her chest. Oh hell no. No way. Rachel stood, grunting under the weight. The dragon was heavier than it looked, but she'd hauled 50-pound bags of flour in her dad's bakery growing up. She could manage. She kicked the kitchen door open and walked straight into the dining room. Conversation stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Acrylixian diplomats' translators squealed in surprise. Every eye in the restaurant turned to watch the human waitress carrying a dragon through the middle of dinner service. Rachel didn't care. Her uniform was covered in dragon saliva and her arms were already aching, but she kept walking. The kid needed a doctor. Everything else could wait. Someone get medical, she called out. Now. A server fumbled for his communicator. The manager looked like he might pass out. And in the corner, rising from the private booth like a copper mountain, Emperor Kale-Thrus stared at her with eyes that could melt steel. Rachel met his gaze and didn't look away. The dragon child in her arms whimpered and gripped her uniform tighter, tiny claws catching in the fabric. Whatever happened next, she'd deal with it. Right now this kid needed help. And Rachel Morgan had never walked away from someone who needed help in her entire life. She wasn't about to start now. Emperor Kael'Thrus felt like someone had punched him in the chest when he saw the human carrying Prince Drenval through the dining hall. That was his son. His youngest. His secret shame that nobody was supposed to see. For 3 months he'd kept the boy hidden. Told everyone the child was ill, recovering back home. Nobody could know the truth. Nobody could know that the Emperor's own bloodline had produced a dragon who couldn't fly. And now this human woman was carrying him through a restaurant full of diplomats and traders like it was nothing. What is the meaning of this? His voice came out like thunder. The wine glasses on nearby tables actually rattled. Several aliens ducked their heads. A Voltarian delegate dropped his fork. The human looked up at him. She was small, maybe 5.5 feet tall. Dark blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her uniform had a name badge that read Beth Carter. She had grease stains on her sleeve and what looked like dragon saliva on her shoulder. And she looked at him, an emperor who ruled 17 star systems, without even a flicker of fear. Your kid was choking in the back hallway, she said flatly. Alone. I helped him. Now he needs a doctor. Kael'Thrus felt his scales bristle, heat rising through his body. You touched the Imperial Prince? I saved the Imperial Prince. Beth shifted the dragonling's weight in her arms. Drenval was heavy, Kael'Thrus knew. At least 150 pounds. This human had to be struggling, but her voice stayed steady. And where were his people? He was dying back there and nobody was watching him. The restaurant had gone completely silent. You could hear the ventilation system humming. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pot clattered. But every single being in that dining room was staring at them. Watching a human waitress talk back to the Dragon Emperor. Nobody did that. Ever. In dragon culture you bowed. You lowered your crest. You showed respect or you died. But then Kael'Thrus made the mistake of looking at his son. Drenval was pressed against the human's chest, his malformed wings tucked awkwardly against his sides. He wasn't crying. Wasn't trying to hide his face like he did around the servants. Instead, he was looking up at Beth like she was the safest thing in the universe. When was the last time his son had looked at anyone that way? When was the last time Drenval hadn't flinched when someone touched him? I will take him, Kael'Thrus said, reaching out with clawed hands. Drenval made a sound, a distressed chirp that cut straight through Kael'Thrus's heart. The boy grabbed Beth's uniform with both front claws, holding on tight. Refusing to let go. His own son. Afraid of him. Beth raised one eyebrow. How about I carry him to the medical bay and you walk with us? He's been through enough today. It was absurd. Impossible. Dragons did not take orders from humans. Humans were nothing in the grand scheme of the galaxy. Soft little mammals who'd only joined the galactic community 3 generations ago. They couldn't breathe fire. Couldn't fly. Couldn't even survive on half the planets in known space without environmental suits. And yet here he was, listening to one tell him what to do. Lead the way, Kael'Thrus heard himself say. His security team looked shocked. His advisor's mouth literally hung open. But Kael'Thrus didn't care. He followed the human through the restaurant, through the station corridors, while other beings pressed themselves against walls to let them pass. The medical bay smelled like antiseptic and ozone. The station doctor, a Trillian with 4 arms, ran scanners over Drenval while Beth held him steady on the examination table. The boy kept one claw wrapped around her wrist the whole time. He will recover, the doctor announced. But another minute without air and we would be having a different conversation. This human saved his life. After the doctor left, Beth sat on the edge of the exam table. She pulled out her data device and started showing Drenval something on the screen. Pictures. Earth animals, Kael'Thrus realized, moving closer. Dogs. Cats. Something called a horse. And his son was smiling. Actually smiling. Making happy chirping sounds. When was the last time Kael'Thrus had seen that? Months? Years? He needs better care, Beth said suddenly. She didn't look up from the screen. And people who don't treat him like he's broken. He cannot fly, Kael'Thrus said, and hated how defensive he sounded. In our culture, flight is everything. It determines your rank, your honor, your worth. A dragon who cannot fly is what? Worthless. Now Beth did look up and her eyes were hard. Gray-blue like Earth's oceans. Yeah, I figured. Real nice culture you got there, your majesty. Nobody had ever interrupted him before. Nobody. He is a child, Beth continued. He deserves better than being hidden in a hallway where he can choke to death alone. What kind of father does that? The words hit like physical blows. Kael'Thrus wanted to roar, to explain, to make her understand. But she was right. He'd been so afraid of dishonor, of shame, that he'd stopped seeing his own son. Stop protecting him. Beth stood up, pulled a card from her pocket and held it out. If you want to do right by him, call me. I work here 6 days a week. Station contact info's on there. Then she did the most incredible thing. She patted Drenval's head gently, whispered something that made the boy chirp happily and walked out. Just walked away. Back to her tables, back to her job, like she hadn't just challenged an emperor and won. Calethru stood there holding her contact card, watching his son's eyes follow her until she disappeared around the corner. Everything he thought he knew about strength, about honor, about being a good father, it was all wrong. And somehow, a human waitress had just proven it in less than an hour. For 3 weeks, Emperor Calethru did something he'd never done before. He became invisible. Well, not literally. Dragons couldn't exactly blend in. But he wore plain trader clothes instead of his imperial robes. He kept his crest lowered, his posture slouched. He filed off the royal markings on his claws. To anyone who looked, he was just another dragon merchant on shore leave, maybe checking out the station before doing business. Nobody bowed. Nobody scrambled out of his way. It was strange. Liberating. Terrifying. He spent those 3 weeks watching Beth Carter. Not in a creepy way. At least he hoped it wasn't creepy. He just needed to understand. How could a random human waitress see something in his son that he'd missed? How could she treat Drenval like a person instead of a problem? Beth worked the evening shift at the restaurant, 6 days a week. Calethru's learned her schedule. He'd sit in the back corner, order cheap food and watch. She treated everyone the same. That was the first thing he noticed. A Krelixian ambassador got the same smile as a Voltarian dock worker. She remembered orders, asked about people's days, made jokes that crossed species barriers. When a maintenance drone, literally the lowest form of worker on the station, needed help reaching a high shelf, Beth grabbed a stepladder without being asked. One evening, he watched her help an elderly Grell cross the busy concourse. The old alien moved slowly, tentacles shaking with age. People rushed past, annoyed. Beth took 15 minutes out of her shift to walk with him, matching his pace, chatting like she had all the time in the world. Another night, a kid, some kind of blue-skinned species Calethru's didn't recognize, dropped their toy in the middle of the corridor during rush hour. The thing was about to get trampled by the crowd. Beth dove through moving bodies like she was diving for a fumbled ball, snatched the toy and returned it to the crying child with a big smile. Here you go, buddy. You gotta hold tight to this guy, okay? The kid's parent tried to tip her. She refused. The thing that really got Calethru's was the drunk merchant. It was 2 a.m. Beth's shift had ended an hour ago, but she was still in the restaurant break room. A Terrasian trader, clearly hammered on too much Juvian whiskey, was crying about his failed business deals. His wife leaving him. His ship getting impounded. Beth sat there, still in her dirty uniform, drinking terrible coffee and listening. Just listening. Occasionally saying, "That's rough," or, "Sounds like you're dealing with a lot." She didn't offer solutions. Didn't judge. Just gave the guy someone to talk to. When the merchant finally stumbled off to sleep it off, Beth stood, stretched and went home. Like it was nothing. Like sitting up until 3 a.m. with a stranger's problems was just part of life. Calethru's couldn't put it off anymore. He contacted her through the information card she'd given him. To his surprise, Beth agreed to meet. They chose a quiet cafe in the human quarter of the station. She showed up in civilian clothes, jeans and a sweater that said Colorado State. She ordered something called a latte and didn't seem bothered at all that an emperor wanted to talk. "Why did you help Drenval?" Calethru's asked after they sat down. The coffee here was terrible, bitter and weak, but Beth didn't seem to mind. She shrugged. "Because he needed help. That's what you do. But he is not your species. Not your responsibility." Beth took a sip of her drink. "Can I call you Kale? All those titles make my head hurt." She didn't wait for permission. On Earth we have this saying, "It takes a village." It means everyone's responsible for everyone else. Especially kids. She pulled out her data pad and started scrolling through images. "Look at this." The pictures showed humans with metal legs. Chairs with wheels. Devices in their ears. One man had what looked like robotic arms. "We adapt," Beth explained. "Someone can't walk? We build them something that lets them move. Can't hear? We make devices to help. Can't see? We teach them to read with their fingers." She looked up at him. "We build tools for people who need them. We don't throw them away because they're different." "On my world, such adaptations would be seen as weakness," Calethru said quietly. "Admitting you cannot do something naturally brings shame. Then your world's got it backwards." Beth sipped her coffee, completely casual. like she was discussing the weather instead of challenging thousands of years of dragon culture. You know what made humans the top species on Earth? Not strength. We're actually pretty weak compared to most predators. Bears would destroy us. Tigers, wolves, even a really angry deer could kill a human. She scrolled through more images. It was cooperation. We carried our wounded. We took care of people who couldn't hunt or fight. We adapted our environment so everyone could contribute. That made us strong. Not individual power, collective support. Beth showed him a picture of a man in a wheelchair. This is a scientist named Jake Morrison. He can't walk because of an accident. But he figured out a new propulsion system that powers half the ships in human space now. Should we have thrown him away because his legs don't work? Another image. A woman with one arm. Amanda Reeves. Lost her arm in a factory accident. She went on to become one of Earth's best surgeons. She says losing the arm taught her to think creatively, to find new ways to solve problems. More pictures followed. A blind musician who composed symphonies that aliens traveled light years to hear. A deaf engineer who designed communication systems that worked across species. An old man with a breathing tube who wrote books that changed human philosophy. These people achieved incredible things, Beth said. Not despite their disabilities. Sometimes because of them. They had to adapt. Think differently. Find creative solutions. That made them stronger, not weaker. Calthrus felt something crack inside his chest. A belief he'd held his entire life, suddenly shattering. All this time he'd thought Drenval's twisted wings made him worthless. Less than other dragons. A source of shame. What if it was just different? What if his son could become something amazing, not despite his condition but because of what it taught him? Your son is smart, Beth said, putting her data pad away. I could see it in his eyes. He watches. Thinks. Understands things. You're wasting that by hiding him away. Calthrus stared at his coffee, not trusting himself to speak. Everything he knew was wrong. And somehow, a human waitress was teaching an emperor how to be a father. The Dragon High Council chambers were carved from a single mountain of black stone. Ancient. Massive. Built to make anyone who entered feel small. But Emperor Calthrus had never felt smaller than he did right now, standing before 300 of the most powerful dragons in the Empire. His son stood beside him. Prince Drenval wore the adaptive flight harness that human engineers had spent 6 weeks designing. It was beautiful, polished silver and gold with anti-gravity nodes where wings should be. The harness wrapped around the boy's chest and connected to a lightweight frame that extended from his shoulders. Drenval looked terrified but determined. Calthrus was so proud of him he could barely breathe. Explain yourself, Emperor. Lord Tavron spoke first. He was old, his copper scales faded to dull brown. You summon us here without warning. You bring the boy. What is the meaning of this? Calthrus took a breath. Fire burned in his chest. Not anger, nerves. I have made a decision about succession. Prince Drenval will be my heir. The chamber exploded. Dragons roared. Some in shock, some in outrage. Wings snapped open in aggressive displays. The temperature in the room spiked as dozens of dragons instinctively heated their breath in anger. The wingless one? Lord Tavron's voice cut through the chaos. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious. Calthrus kept his voice steady. Furthermore, I am introducing the Adaptation Accords. New laws that will change how our empire treats those with physical differences. We will build support systems. Create technologies to help. Fund education and research. No dragon will be cast aside simply because they are different. This is insanity. Another noble, Lady Chervier, stood up, her green scales bristling. Our empire was built on strength. On the power of flight. You would throw away millennia of tradition for one child. I would throw away tradition that wastes potential, Calthrus replied. That's when Lord Tavron really lost it. He was one of the oldest nobles, one of the most traditional. His voice dripped with disgust when he spoke. You have been corrupted by mammals. By humans. Everyone knows you've been meeting with that waitress. She has poisoned your mind with their weak philosophy. Funny you should mention that. Beth Carter's voice echoed through the chamber. Every single dragon turned. There, walking through the massive doors like she owned the place, was the human. She wore nice clothes this time, a suit jacket and pants, but she still looked tiny among the dragons. Still looked completely human and completely fragile. And completely unafraid. What is the meaning of this? Tavron's wings flared. A human? In the High Council. I invited her, Calthrus said. As an expert witness. Expert in what? Making coffee? Tavron laughed and several other nobles joined in. Beth walked right up to the center of the chamber floor. She didn't even flinch when Tavron loomed over her, easily 50 times her size. "You called me weak," she said calmly. "Said humans have a weak philosophy. Want to test that theory? You dare challenge me? Not physically, obviously. You'd squash me like a bug." Beth smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Let's talk about strength. Real strength. Not just who can fly the highest or breathe the hottest fire." She turned, addressing the entire council now. "You think throwing away people makes you strong? You're doing the opposite. You're making yourselves weaker with every generation." "How dare you?" Tavron started. "I dare because I'm right and you know it." Beth talked over him like he was a customer complaining about cold soup. "You throw away your children if they can't fly. You're inventors if they're not athletic. You're thinkers if they don't fit some perfect warrior image. You know what humans call that? Stupid." Gasps echoed through the chamber. "You didn't insult dragons. Especially not in their own council hall." Beth wasn't done. "Humans had a saying, survival of the fittest. You probably think that means the strongest survives, right? Wrong. It means the most adaptable. The one who can change when the environment changes. The one who can work together." She pointed at Drenval. "That kid has had to adapt every single day of his life. He's learned to solve problems you've never even thought about. He's learned to think creatively, to persist when everything tells him to give up. He's learned empathy and resilience. And you call that weakness?" "She speaks truth." A young female dragon stood up. Her name was Velsha and she couldn't have been more than 30 years old. Young for a dragon. "I have a daughter with a genetic condition. Her fire burns too hot. It hurts her when she uses it. I've been hiding her, training her to suppress it. But why? Why should I waste her potential because she's different?" Murmurs rippled through the younger dragons in the chamber. "My son has hearing problems," another young male said, standing. "He cannot hear the high-frequency calls we use in flight formation. I was told to remove him from military training. But he's brilliant with strategy, with planning. We're wasting him." More dragons stood. More stories. A pattern emerging, younger dragons who'd been hiding family members, hiding problems, terrified of the shame. "This is treason." Tavron's roar shook the walls. His scales blazed with heat. "I call for the Emperor's removal. He has been corrupted. He is unfit to lead." The chamber divided instantly. Older dragons on one side roaring agreement. Younger dragons on the other, uncertainty in their eyes but something like hope too. "You want civil war?" Kael'thrus asked quietly. "You want to tear the Empire apart over this?" "Better that than weakness," Tavron snarled. Beth looked at Drenval. The boy was scared, trembling. She walked over and put her hand on his shoulder. Such a small gesture. Such a human thing to do. "Show them," she said softly. "Show them what you can do." Drenval looked at his father. Kael'thrus nodded. The boy activated his harness. Anti-gravity nodes hummed to life. And Prince Drenval, who had never flown in his life, rose into the air. He was shaky at first, uncertain. But then he soared up toward the vaulted ceiling, performing a loop that would have been impossible with natural wings. The harness let him do things no dragon could: hover in place, fly backward, change direction instantly. Half the chamber watched in wonder. The other half in horror. Civil conflict was coming. Kael'thrus could see it in Tavron's eyes. But change had already taken root. And sometimes change was worth fighting for. The civil war lasted 6 months. 6 months of fighting, negotiating, political maneuvering, and heartbreak. Emperor Kael'thrus had faced enemies before. Pirates, rival empires, rebellions in the outer colonies. But this was different. This time the enemy was his own people. His own family. His 3 eldest children sided with the traditionalists. They called him a traitor. Said he'd abandoned everything their ancestors built. His oldest son, Varthen, led several military strikes against reform installations. His daughter, Melissa, gave speeches calling for his removal. They believed what they'd been taught their whole lives, that strength meant perfection and anything less was weakness. Kael'thrus almost died twice. Once from an assassination attempt in his own palace. Once in a battle over the northern territories where traditionalist forces tried to establish a separate government. He nearly lost his crown. Nearly lost everything. But they won. Barely. By the thinnest margin. Not through military might, but through the younger generation refusing to give up. Through parents who were tired of hiding their children. Through dragons who'd spent their whole lives feeling like failures finally being told they had worth. Now, standing in the ancient coronation hall, Kael'thru's could barely believe they'd made it. The hall was packed. That was the first change. Traditionally, only noble dragons attended coronations. But today the crowd was mixed. Young dragons, old dragons, warriors and scholars. And scattered throughout humans. Engineers, doctors, teachers. All invited. All welcome. Beth Carter stood beside Kael'thru's, and that would have been unthinkable a year ago. She wore ceremonial robes, blue and silver, marking her new position as the Empire's first ambassador of cultural exchange. She'd fought for that title. Not with weapons, but with words and stubbornness and an absolutely refusal to let dragons hurt themselves through stupid traditions. You nervous? Beth asked quietly. Terrified, Kael'thru's admitted. He'll be fine. Kid's been practicing non-stop. Below them, in the center of the massive hall, Prince Drenval waited. He wore his adaptive harness. Upgraded now, sleeker, more powerful. Human engineers and dragon craftsmen had worked together to perfect it. The silver-gold frame caught the light from 1,000 glowing crystals embedded in the ceiling. The boy looked so small down there. So young. Only 8 years old and carrying the weight of an empire's future on his shoulders. The ceremony began. Ancient words spoken in the old dragon tongue. Promises made. Oaths sworn. And then came the moment everyone waited for, the coronation flight. Every crown prince in dragon history had performed this ritual. You flew from the ground to the highest point of the hall, circled 3 times and landed before the emperor. It symbolized reaching for greatness. Achieving the impossible. Rising above limitations. For thousands of years, it required natural wings. Strong wings. Perfect wings. Not anymore. Drenval activated his harness. The anti-gravity nodes hummed so quietly you could barely hear them. And then he lifted off the ground. For a moment, nobody breathed. Drenval rose slowly, steadily, his malformed wings tucked against his sides. The harness compensated for everything he couldn't do naturally. Made him stronger than natural wings ever could. He reached the first tier of balconies. Then the second. Then the third. Higher and higher until he approached the vaulted ceiling 500 feet above the floor. And then he started to fly. Not just hover. Not just move. Really fly. He performed a barrel roll, something no dragon with natural wings could do so smoothly. He stopped in midair, rotated, accelerated. The harness responded to his thoughts, to tiny movements of his body. Human technology and dragon innovation combined into something completely new. Drenval laughed. The sound echoed through the hall, pure joy that brought tears to Kael'thru's eyes. His son had never laughed like that before. Never felt the freedom of flight. Never experienced what every other dragon took for granted. The crowd went wild. Young dragons cheered. Humans applauded. Even some of the older nobles who'd opposed the changes watched with something like wonder in their eyes. Drenval completed the 3 ceremonial circles, then descended. He landed perfectly right in front of Kael'thru's throne. His face was split with the biggest smile Kael'thru's had ever seen. I did it, the boy whispered. Dad, I actually flew. Kael'thru's couldn't speak. He just pulled his son into a hug, not caring that it wasn't proper imperial behavior. Later, after the ceremony ended and the crowds dispersed into celebration, Kael'thru's and Beth stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city. Below them, dragons and humans mingled in the streets. A sight that would have been impossible a year ago. You saved more than my son that day in the restaurant, Kael'thru said quietly. You saved me from becoming so bound by tradition that I couldn't see what really mattered. Beth shrugged, uncomfortable with compliments as always. You did the hard part. I just pointed out the obvious. There was nothing obvious about it. Not to me. Not until you showed me. In the distance, Drenval flew past with a group of young dragons. Some had natural wings. Some had adaptive harnesses like his. Some had other assistive devices, modified breathing apparatus, enhanced sensory equipment. All of them flew together, laughing and playing. Ambassador Carter, Kael'thru said formally, I have a proposal. A permanent human-dragon medical exchange program. Technology sharing. Educational partnerships. Cultural integration programs. What would you say to that? Beth grinned, the same troublemaker smile from that first night. I'd say it's about damn time. They watched Drenval soar through the sky, his laughter carrying on the wind. The boy who'd almost died alone in a hallway. Who'd been hidden away like a shameful secret. Now he was crown prince, symbol of a new empire, proof that different didn't mean broken. Kael'thru's finally understood what humanity had been trying to teach him all along. Strength wasn't about physical perfection. It wasn't about meeting some impossible standard. Real strength was about lifting others up when they fell. About adapting when the world changed. About caring for those who couldn't fly alone. Because that's what made a civilization truly powerful. Not perfect individuals but imperfect people supporting each other. And somewhere in the universe, a human waitress had known that all along.